Good morning. This is Dishha Bagchi for ThePrint, and we're back with Lieutenant General H.S. Panag to discuss his column from this week. Indian military must let go of male warrior culture. Just recruiting women is not enough. Welcome back, General. Thank you for being here.
Disha, it's always a pleasure to discuss my column with you.
So, in this week's column, you look at the armed forces expanding its enlistment of women in the institution and the reforms needed to achieve gender parity. So, to begin with, what do you think has been holding the army back from giving equal opportunities to women?
As you're aware, the Indian Army, Navy, and the Air Force inducted women as officers as far back as 1992. That's 31 years ago. However, the progress to induct them as into other ranks to provide equal opportunities to women at par with their male counterparts, was rather slow in coming. And primarily, it is the proddings of the Supreme Court through its benchmark judgments with respect to women officers, and also the change in government's policy and Army's own policy, that now the stage is set for induction of women in personnel below officer rank, or commonly known as PBOR. As you are aware, that the Navy and the Air Force have already inducted them as Agniveers during the recruitment last year in 2022. However, the Army was a little slow to begin, but now the reports say that the Army has also finalized its policy, and subject to approval of the Ministry of Defense, women will also be allowed to join as Agniveers through the Agnipath scheme into the Indian Army. Now, traditionally, historically, armies have been reluctant to take women into the armed forces. In fact, our own army resisted it tooth and nail in the Supreme Court. And while there have been exceptions, including in India, we have had Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi, who took part in the first freedom struggle. We have had women in Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Indian National Army. We have had Razia Sultan, and women have excelled in almost all of the fields, including as officers. They have won decorations and awards. Having said that, war fighting was considered a male preserve, and most of the armies, modern armies, resisted them, except for employing them as doctors, as nurses, or in subsidiary support roles. Except there were, even in that, there were exceptions, in the sense that USSR in particular used them in combat and as snipers during the Second World War. Now, what were the reasons? What are the reasons for this? The first reason is the mindset. Society as a whole has got a patriarchal attitude towards, as far as women are concerned, a condescending attitude, that they are the weaker sex, that they are incapable of they have no strength. So this in the army is even more prevalent, because army is symbolic of male chauvinism, male machoism, and the cult of the male warrior. So, culturally, as far as the soldiers are concerned, and for that matter, the officers, I'll come to that point. So they consider women as the inferior sex who are unfit to become soldiers. So this is the fundamental attitude. It's a cultural problem which has been proved wrong. Of course, in pure physical terms, there are differences, but it has been proved wrong by the women performance in sports, in adventure activities, and even the armed forces now all across the world. So, just to talk about this mindset that we have, General Rawat, when he was the Chief of Defense Staff and the highest ranking officer late General Rawat, highest ranking officer in the Indian armed forces. He said that Indian Army is not culturally prepared to accept women as soldiers. We'll have to keep them cocooned from the prying eyes of their subordinates. Commanding officers will go on maternity leave, leaving their units in the lurch, and the nation is not prepared to get back body bags. Now, this is, this reflects the entire male warrior syndrome and a kind of discriminatory attitude towards women. But having said this, there are some genuine reasons why the army is objected. One is physical prowess. The argument of the armed forces have always been, in all armies, not only in our army, in all armies, that women are physically weaker and they cannot withstand the rigors of military service, particularly combat. Now, the issue is relative. Physiologically, women have got less muscular strength. They have less aerobic capacity. This has been proved by research. But having said this, they can also compete with their male counterparts by at least meeting the minimum standards as far as the armed forces are concerned. So this was one of the main worries. It has been proven by the women in sports, in adventure activities, that they are properly trained and physically conditioned women can meet up to the standards of the armed forces. In fact, I would say that our national athletes would be far better in physical. Women athletes would be far better in physical fitness than the average soldier. I'm talking of the average soldier in the armed forces. Now, the second reason that has been cited again is that that within the army, when women are inducted, they will face sexual harassment and sexual assault from superiors, colleagues, and subordinates. Now, this is a problem which can be easily solved if the society can face it. After all, it's a societal problem. Women are facing it day in and day out on the streets. If they can face it, surely it can be remedied within the army. Another reason cited is that they will be abused and tortured by the enemy. I think this again is an extreme situation. Firstly, today we are not in a situation in kind of battles that we fight that there are a large number of prisoners of war and all. There will be exceptions, and those exceptions are also evident in the society where women have been abused and assaulted and tortured by the males, at times by the husbands. So what I'm trying to say is that this is again a relative issue. Why should we worry about this thing when women are prepared to face it? Why should we worry about it at this stage and deny them the opportunity? The fourth last and the last point is terms and conditions of service. That women would expect concessions. They have to be given maternity leave. They have to look after their children. They will get married, and they will then, required posting together with their husbands. That these will interfere with the operational efficiency of the army. So these were some of the reasons why the armed forces were reluctant. But I think the most important reason was a mindset. Once the mindset changes, everything else can be resolved. And as I said, each of the points was relative in context.
Right. Well, you brought up an interesting point, especially your third point, talking about some of the challenges that women might face in the armed forces, specifically speaking about harassment and assault. While you did say that it's a relative issue in terms of when the army, if the army is ever in active battle, that might be a issue that will come up then. Uh, in the context of facing it from enemy forces, but within the institution as well, there have been cases of uh, sexual assault, sexual harassment from superior officers. So how do you think such issues can be remedied within the institution?
You see, crimes against women is a societal problem. In fact, there has been enough has been said in India, as far as the society is concerned. In 2012, we had the famous rape case in Delhi that forced the government to intervene, that forced the Supreme Court to lay down fresh law, as well as lay down the guidelines of dealing with expeditiously dealing with such cases. Within the army, where men and women between the age group of 20 to 40 are living, training, and fighting in close proximity of each other. Living, training, and fighting in close proximity. So this problem becomes more acute, and women can face and do face sexual assault or harassment from superiors, colleagues, and subordinates. Linked to this is that the women also will be relatively young to begin with, and even consensual relationship, which within the barracks has got very serious connotations, because it can be due to a superior intimidation. It can be due to, for that matter, it can work both ways. I'm talking in terms of gender neutrality as far as this thing is concerned. So consensual relationships, when they are living in proximity with each other, will also create a problem. In United States, it was found in a study that 8.4% of women, 8.4%, the United States has got 15%, 16% women in the army. That's over 200,000 of them in the armed forces. That 8.4% faced sexual assault during duty, and even 1.5% men. Now, this is one aspect which is generally not talked about, is the prevalence of homosexuality. But 1.5% of United States soldiers, male soldiers, also faced sexual harassment, not from women, but from other men. Uh, so, so much so that President Joe Biden, as soon as he took over, he set a 90-day independent review commission by a presidential order to review the crime against women in the United States Armed Forces. Why I'm highlighting United States Armed Forces is because our experience is still limited and restricted to the officers who were in a superior position. However, there have been fair amount of offenses against women officers, mostly from superiors, and at times from subordinates, but very rarely from not subordinates, at times from colleagues, very rarely from subordinates, because women were in a position of authority, and so consequently that did not take place. Now, it is not possible to create segregated units or gender-based units. We will have to function in mixed units sooner or later. Now, what are the measures that the armed forces can take and should take? First is change the mindset, education. That there has to be education, that we have to accept women to work alongside us as part of the military family, and they cannot be treated as sexual objects, as inferior sex. So this mindset. So there has to be a lot of stress on education of the rank and file of everybody, that this aspect, women have to be given respect, and no means no. And on consensual sex, very clearly rules and regulations must be laid down that it is forbidden on duty, and In what manner can there be fraternization between men and women within the armed forces? Other thing is that uh, uh, there is a lot of underreporting. There must be no underreporting, and it must not be brushed under the carpet. Cases must be properly investigated. At present, in the armed forces, there is in the armed forces justice system, there are no offenses listed uh, as sexual offenses or as sexual harassment. We pick up and apply the civil law, which whereas for all other offenses within the army's own legal system takes care of it. The point I'm making here is that all these issues, as they come up, they have to be dealt with expeditiously. The armed forces, in consonance with our, Indian Penal Code or its new avatar as it comes out, we must bring and codify these offenses within the military sort of justice system.
Right. You mentioned something interesting again, talking about the fact that sexual harassment, sexual assault hasn't been codified within the military justice system. Why do you think that's the case? What
No,
has
it
held
is.
back the
We were not dealing with women. So we were dealing with homosexuality.
Mhm.
Within the army, because it's mostly a male predominant field. But within the army, there were provisions of dealing with them under Section 45 on becoming conduct, under Section 63 an act petition to good order and military discipline, where sex on duty or sex with subordinates or sex with superiors or even consensual sex among colleagues is forbidden.
Right. So you also mentioned the gender quota within your column. So what do you think is the importance of this quota, and what do you think needs to be reformed within it?
Yeah. Most armies that have inducted women in the course of last 50, 60 years in general, and last 30 odd years in particular, the strength of women varies from 4% to 16%. Despite the large population, not too many women have been wanting to join the army. But that is for most of the data is from the Western armies. Israel is the only sort of exception where 34% women are in the armed forces. That's because there is universal conscription of 2 years for women also. On the face of it, it appears that with the vast population, there'll be no dearth of women. No dearth of women wanting to join the armed forces, and it's also taking into consideration the rampant unemployment in India. And some of the data that we have received reinforces this point that for 10 lakh vacancies in the Navy for Agniveer, there were 82,000 women applicants. That's 8.2% applicants were there. In the army, before the Agnipath scheme, that is when where the enrollment was permanent with the pension and other perks which are not available to the Agniveers. In the case of the CMP, where induction was the Corps of Military Police, where induction was done in 19 and 20 and continuing thereafter, of 100 personnel at a time, there were in 19 and 20, 2019, 2020, there were 1.6 lakh applicants for for 100 jobs, 100 vacancies. The experience of the Central Armed Police Forces is to the contrary. Not they have been able to muster only 3.69%. Right? That's about with a million strong Central Armed Police Forces, 3.69%, roughly about 40,000. Whereas 33% vacancies have been reserved for women since 2016. 2016. And despite the fact that it is you can serve up to 60 years, terms and conditions are not that rigorous as the army is concerned. And there is contributory pension, and their case for old pension scheme is also continuing. So one fear that the army has had That is, we will be overwhelmed with the number of women wanting to join, and we will have to give them equal opportunities, is ill-founded. Because, in my view, particularly given the Agnipath scheme, it will be quite a balanced approach. I do not visualize Indian Army ever having more than 15% women uh, in the defense forces. Of course, the figures can be eventually can be raised, but this is so automatically the issue of you know how many women at what time women actually gets resolved. So the maximum that we should expect will be about 15%. That's the universal experience. Because if in I'm talking of all volunteer armies. I'm not talking of conscripted armies. The the other aspect is that why it may have to be limited in case there are large number of women applicants to begin with, is because of the infrastructure. The infrastructure takes a long time to create. Indian Army will have to take a lot of measures to create the desired infrastructure, particularly in field areas, so that women can have that degree of gender privacy that is desirable even in the armed forces. So this that's why I have suggested that what we should do is we should start by inducting about 5%. I mean, out of the total intake every year, 5% vacancies should be given to women, and these should be progressively increased to about 15% over a decade. And that will also help us to, gradually, in terms of education, in terms of refining our entire system to accept women. It'll help us to ease the whole process. But as I mentioned, I do not visualize that we will ever have more than 15% women in the armed forces. And the Supreme Court quoted a United States Supreme Court judge, J. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she said, while delivering a judgment, not related to the armed forces, but related to gender parity in general. And she said, I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask our brethren, that is the male brethren, is to take their feet off our necks. So give the women equal opportunity, lay down the standards, and do not let the armed military's operational efficiency be affected.
Right. So while you make a interesting point about the fact that you only visualize 15% women within the army, what do you think is holding women back from joining the army in the first place? You've mentioned so many benefits. So what do you think are some of the issues which might stop women
I think
from
it is basically that while there are women who are keen to join uh, because they are inclined to do so, but for majority of the women, considering that it requires long separation from the family, the rigors of service are much more than any other job that is there, in civil life. And so marriage, looking after children, the major problems with these with for the women in the armed forces. So that's why it will, while the initial charm is there that we all want to join, and as I said, educated women, we may get more officers, certainly, and at one time, there may be a time when we may have to restrict the numbers for the sake of infrastructure, or for the sake of overall efficiency of the armed forces. But as far as other ranks are concerned, uh, I've given you the example of the Central Reserve Police Force. Only
Right.
3.69% as compared to 33% reservation. Reservation, not even vacancies. It's not something that is like, it's reservation. that they didn't want to join the much easier life in the Central Armed Police Forces.
Okay. I just think it's interesting because reasons like marriage or having children has not really stopped men from joining the army. They still join the army and continue to have families. But do you think women might be a little more hesitant because of these reasons? So it's an interesting point. Well, thank you, General. I think your column has given us some interesting things to think about in terms of women's role within the army. What are some reforms the institution can take to bring gender parity within the armed forces? For readers interested in reading the full article by General Panag, the link to it will be in the description below. Thank you, and we will see you next week.